So the intention for today was to try and keep it relatively light, and we've gone in on politics, religion and politics, salvation. Steve's going on about hell. I mean...
Love it.
For heck.
No, sorry, I shouldn't have said.
Entirely the wrong point to interject with a love it.
We're a group of normal people, all trying to figure out how to follow Jesus in the 21st century. Despite this thing that unites us, we all have very different views on church, religion, life, and faith. We want to invite you into our conversations so that you too can hear new perspectives, unique ideas, and see that it's okay to be honest about your faith. Welcome to our podcast. Recording? We good? Into hood?
Yep, I'm recording.
Okay, hang on.
Yeah, I got it.
Record to this computer.
I got it.
Wagwan gangsters. You right, Steve?
Yep.
Oh,
It's just on his phone. Last time he was writing notes. This time he's on his phone.
Got to write notes every now and again.
that's true.
Helps
Steve,
remember what people
I
say.
visualise in my mind you're the type of guy that writes in a fountain pen.
No,
No.
Oh, that's bitterly disappointing.
biro. Fountain pen's messy, not quick enough.
Oh, all right.
I brought down a fountain pen for Christmas last year.
Yes, you did.
Oh, lovely
It's
fountain pens. Love fountain pens.
It's really nice. The only problem with that fountain pen is the lid doesn't work anymore somehow.
Buy a new one. I can send you a link.
Could you?
Yeah.
Because I've looked for it and I can't find it anywhere. And I love that pen. It was special to me because my brother bought it.
Yeah. Favourite brother.
Do you like fountain pens?
Love them.
What is it about them you love?
it gives just the pretentious air of authority.
Yeah, you feel like Robin
Yeah, I
Hood,
figured.
don't you? Do you dip it in something
Not Robin
as well?
Hood. I don't dip it in anything, but I do have one of those inkwell things. I draw it up into the cartridge. Anyway.
That's beautiful.
Does it have to be heavy?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
but it has to be one that you have to take time to open, you know?
Yeah, I do remember when I brought it, it had a bit of weight to it, didn't it? That's what
Yeah,
stuck
it's a
out to me.
serious-
Yeah.
It says I don't mess around. It says what I'm going to sign, what I'm putting my name to.
Mm-hmm.
This is serious business.
Serious pen for serious business.
Talking of which, tonight, a significant meeting with my leaders.
Go on.
All right.
Talking about the future. Spending some money.
What have you? Was it you've had that before this?
Yeah, so we've been talking about redeveloping our site for a long time. And so we are investigating basically doing something quite radical. Well, I say radical.
Turn it into a Buddhist temple. What's radical about
So
it?
basically, well, okay, yeah. So plan A is all about. So there are three main areas where our church is.
Right.
Housing is a big issue. Families and cultural, like regeneration, development, etc., etc. And so we're exploring how we can connect in with those three areas. Housing, we're going to work with the housing association to give a large chunk of the property away for redevelopment, social housing, and then that will fund the rest of the redevelopment, which will include a custom-built space for families and young people. Then the last stage will be basically kind of creating a music and arts venue that we will use on a Sunday for worship, but the main body of the week will be given over to kind of generating ministry opportunities in culture and arts. So, but it was a hefty bill. The quotes were pretty significant. Like, it's never an easy gig to ask people who are not particularly up to date with technology to spend money on technology. Because, do you know what I mean? It feels like a luxury. If you've got to buy without it, to turn around and say, we'd like to spend $6,000 on a projector, that's a big deal. Because For them, that's £6,000 they didn't spend. They didn't have to spend before. But when you've been in and around that world for a long time, you know that's not a lot of money. So it's a weird thing to kind of navigate. Anyway, sorry, I just totally hijacked the session.
You're right.
The reason I find it quite exciting is that one of the jobs I've been doing during this lockdown,
this unprecedented period.
This unprecedented period.
This gift.
That's a hail back to episode 2, I believe.
Yeah.
There you are, listeners. If you've joined us late, you can go back and listen to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so during this time, I've been going through the annals of the church's history, and I came across a little entry today that angered me slightly, if I'm honest. Jamie got the brunt of this earlier.
I did.
Here we go. I'm going to try and simulate the sound of a page turning. Oh dear. Right, this is what it said. Tomorrow, this is the minister in 1965. 1965.
Just
Tomorrow,
about to win the World Cup.
Yeah. Great things were around the corner.
They were.
You'd never get it from this. Anyway, tomorrow, the future of the church will depend on its answer to 2 problems. Firstly, the church must change so that the fellowship becomes a real intimate sharing and concern over spiritual things. Fair dues. At the moment, church life follows too often a programme of meetings, sectional, passive, over-organised and under-attended. Ouch. Often acting as listening posts rather than meeting points, and fellowship should provide friendship in spiritual depth, communicating with one another the deep things of God. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing, the church has become too detached from the community in which it's placed. That's a burn. Service is viewed too often as something within and for the church instead of something by the church for the people. This is the question that must be tackled if the church is to justify its purpose, to evangelise and serve its area. And I was like, man, that's 1965. They knew this stuff back then. Like, they knew. And I'm not sure they did it. Like...
Oh, so you're not angry at the pastor?
Oh, no. That dude was on point. I'm cross with the fact that we knew the deal, and yet we continue doing what we've always done and getting what we've always got, which is rapid decline and aging populations, poor discipleship, and we're all like scratching our heads now going, oh, why is the church struggling, huh? Like, but we knew it. They knew it. It's right there. 65. And these are the questions we're still asking. I attended a conference this year that literally had that as its subject matter. Like, you could have condensed this. It's just nuts. And I'm like, how are we still asking this stuff? Like, how are we still thrashing this stuff through? It's not hard, is it? So I was just a bit like, how are we still been asking this stuff? Because it's not hard, is it? I mean, call me nuts, but I go to places I enjoy. Right? Yeah. Like, I don't make a habit of visiting establishments that I think, cool, this is boring. I tend to avoid those places. So, I mean, maybe I'm oversimplifying stuff, but perhaps if you made church a bit more fun, like, I'm bored half the time I'm there, and I'm the bloody preacher, and I'm like, oh man, this is
amazing. This isn't coming from me.
I can feel myself switching off. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes I'm like, but not every time. I'm not saying that every time. That would be disingenuous for me to kind of paint that as the main picture. But sometimes I'm just like, God, this wouldn't be hard to make interesting.
Well, theoretically, it should be the best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah. When was sliced bread invented?
I don't know. Probably after bread.
Yeah, I think so.
Wise man.
You'd be pretty gifted if you could do it the other way around.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry about that little diatribe there.
No, it's fine. That is
a little
fine.
Rant.
It was fun to observe and watch.
Great. The question is someone in like how long was that? 50 years ago. In 50 years, we're going to be having the same conversation.
Well, I mean, here's the nuts thing, right? Like, I read the early the first like 2 ministers in place, the guy like he received 300 people into membership. So he baptized 300 people in his tenure.
Okay, however,
what's the deal?
No, here's the thing. I'm always slightly skeptical of looking back and saying like those were the good old times, because so I remember having a conversation relatively recently with someone talking about talking about like hundreds of years ago how everyone was this is a Christian nation, blah 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 blah, how they would call it like the good old days when people were all churchgoers and the nation was a Christian nation and all that kind of thing. And
we had 2 world wars.
Well, that's my thing. So I'm kind of thinking, yeah, like in because he was talking like quite a way back as well, and I was like, yeah, but we also like we burnt witches at the stake.
I mean, not 100 years ago.
No, we didn't 100 years ago. But I'm saying he was talking about further back than then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I was like, we also had slavery, and we also did those things. So there is like this danger of looking back, like just because the church was full of people, were they actually proper Christians, or were they just going along with the cultural norms of the time? And you could say that about the 60s too. Was it really that much better, or was it just the culture allowed that to happen?
Well, I agree with you mostly, Jamie, but I think my question would be, in Dan's particular situation in the church there, would, even if like this, because he sounds very on point, he sounds very aware of the needs in his community and where he's feeling that the church aren't meeting those needs, and it sounds like his church was well attended, fairly effective in what it was doing for its day. But with someone like that anyway, when someone is that tuned into their community, is there not always something where they're going to be dissatisfied with how the church is, that there's something more to be done, that people, not everyone is as enthusiastic as it should be? And I think to your point, Jamie, it's right, because when you've got a large group of people who are going to church, whether it's church or something else, you're going to have a certain amount of just fitting in and going along with what everyone else is doing. And there's that even greater danger. And that's probably what his frustration is. That sounds really frustrating when he says, these are really well organised programs, but quite frankly, poorly attended. And, we've got everything that we're supposed to have, but actually your heart's aren't in the right place.
Yeah. And I guess the big question is, what's your metric, right? Like, how are you measuring this? Because the default function of evangelical health has been, the measurement has been how many people are coming on Sundays, right? Like, we all know this. I mean, well, I say we all, it's me and Steve attending pastors' conferences. It's there's a bit of a weird, like, how should I say, measuring contest. You know?
Big time,
Do you know what I mean? It's like, how many people are you gathering? And you're like, I can only have this conversation so many times.
That's always the second question.
Yeah, like, it's always the follow-up question, because we've got no way of measuring the health of churches in the contemporary. Like, no one's said to me, so how healthy are your disciples? Like, not that I mean, that would be a weird opening question. Probably like, what's your name would be a good start, but certainly in conferences that tends to be the measurement. And so it's probably unhelpful that I've referred back to a stage where that was the way they measured it. But what I love about his perception in that set of comments is maturity is the measurement, like the spiritual depth with one another, the ability to grow as a fellowship. And I've got problems with the word fellowship, partly because it's just so unbelievably archaic and dry. Steve
loves that word.
Don't you, Steve?
Oh.
But then the second thing is about the fact that it should be impacting the social life of the local community, and that for me is the grind, because I'm like, it's clearly our approach is clearly not working. I mean, anyone can see that. People come up to me, and I went through the pastoral vacancies list for the Baptist Union today, and I was just so unbelievably blown away by how committed communities are to Bible teaching and worship and charismatic gifts. And I'm like, those are good things. Please don't hear what I'm not saying. But when those are fronted to the exclusion of engagement with our community, it's like, no wonder there's a lack of contextualization and ability to understand what's going on in our local areas. It's like, that's why we're in the mess we're in. So do you really think that more Bible teaching is the answer?
Do you, Steve?
Is that really the deal? No, I'm not asking Steve. It's a rhetorical question.
No, I think let's answer it.
All right.
Steve, look to the skies for inspiration.
Yeah, but no.
Good answer.
No, because I think they're because Dan's not saying that Bible teaching isn't important, right? What he is saying, and I'm looking at him so he can tell me I'm wrong, is that there hasn't been an outward focus from the church. So how many, I'll go with my circles of things, how many churches would employ an evangelist? I look at the papers, the sort of evangelical newspapers for the job articles and or the vacancies, church vacancies, are all assistant pastors, youth workers, women's workers. Great, brilliant. All pastors. I don't see any saying evangelist community workers. And I think that's very interesting where we're at. And then can
I just ask what you mean? What you mean by evangelist? Just for people that are listening.
I mean, someone who's going to be outward focused, looking not just inside the congregation, but actually looking outward. And that doesn't just mean numbers either. That's a different discussion, I guess. It's always going to come back to this, isn't it?
Sorry to jump in there, but I also wonder whether that even for a good number of those churches that are asking for evangelists are actually asking to outsource
Yes.
the thing that they should be learning to do themselves, right? So
Totally.
So the reason I've got this beef with the idea that I'll just teach the Bible and it'll be all right is like, well, we did a really good job of Sunday school teaching, if you and I'm being a little bit facetious there, but like 30s, 40s, 50s, that was the era of the Sunday school. And where is that generation now? They're absent, completely absent from church life. And so I kind of get that feel. It's like the frustration that Jesus felt when he was like, you guys search the scriptures all day long and you just seem to not have any sort of genuine experience of life because you're not coming to me, and I'm the one out there with those that you want to exclude. I'm the one out. It's like, you read the signs of the times, man. Like, there's stuff happening beyond the walls of this religious community that you need to be alive to if you're going to have a genuine experience of life. Because that's where I'm at. I'm out there, like we were saying last week. So I'm out there in the sick, the hungry, the naked, the imprisoned. But if you want to do your meeting thing and study the scriptures all day long, go for it. But you'll find that that will be the death of you. You won't have real life there. And to me, it's like, well, the sign of good Bible teaching surely is the production of that awareness of a local community, because that's the story.
But that's the key phrase, isn't it? it's good Bible teaching. And so I wouldn't overemphasize that Bible teaching will be the death of you. That wouldn't personally be my words. But I do
Just
agree.
to clarify, anyone's listening that might know me. Carry on, Steve.
No, I just that's not my position. But I would say where it becomes, if that's not transforming you to be outward focused and to be just Christ-like, because I was reading, even it was yesterday, just the life of Jesus and some of the things that Jesus was doing, and I was just like, no, it was a sermon I was listening to. Sorry, not that that's important, but
It's all right, Steve. I do that all the time. It's like, I was reading this book. That's not true. I was listening to it.
But it was about the feeding of 4,000, and it was just how Jesus describes the crowds, whereas he's saying they've been without food for 3 days. We can't let them go home on an empty stomach. I have compassion for these people, and it's like, this is Jesus not just seeing that the crowds are there, but actually seeing and recognizing these are real people who have real needs that he can satisfy, and he's among them, and he's not going to let them go until those needs have been met and satisfied. And I think the problem is that sometimes we're reading the Bible in such a way that we are kind of, it's a holier than thou attitude. As long as I'm reading the Bible, then I'm good. And the actually being transformed by what I'm reading is neglected.
Do you think then there's something about, my perception of what you're saying is that we need to recapture the idea that Jesus wasn't teaching the Bible, and let me clarify what I mean by that. Was he was giving ethical instruction for how to live your life in line with the scriptural tradition, but the idea that Jesus stood up to give some sort of 3-point sermon about the information of this set of texts in order to make you a more knowledgeable Jew, that just doesn't seem to compute whatsoever. Jesus was talking about how you live your day-to-day life, like how you treat your brother, like who is your neighbour, how do you spend your money. Not let's all sit down and discuss the Deuteronomistic history, if you're into that kind of thing, or even some of the teaching that goes on that is purely, I like the idea of the feeding thing, because I think we fed Christians so well they just can't get up anymore. They just can't get up off the pews and do anything. They're just so unbelievably rotund on this diet of good Bible teaching that they're just not. Maybe we should just keep Christians a bit more lean. How about that? I heard a guy was saying, like, he would repeat a sermon. And he would justify it by saying, so I've chatted to you this week, and I know you haven't got this yet, so we're going to do it again.
Yeah.
Like, imagine doing that. Imagine saying, no, we're not going anywhere new until we crack this. Yeah. Because if I'm living this stuff and I know that I haven't got it down, like 3 years with Jesus, the disciples were still asking stupid questions at the end. So what makes you think that you've got it since last Sunday? Anyway, you can all tell I'm in a bit of a argumentative, slightly agitated mood today.
Sorry, Jamie.
Sorry, Jim. Sorry.
So today, on the news, well, actually last night, to be fair, we've had the update, haven't we? Corona. Dan, just pour yourself a drink. I can see you struggling not to make a noise. Just do it. I'll pause.
I'll pour a full glass.
Yeah. So last night in the news, we had the announcement, if you can even call it that, from Mr. Boris.
You sound upset, Jamie. For once, it's not me.
I thought it was a bit of a shambles, to be honest with you. But anyway, we'll get on to that, I'm sure. About the lockdown changes that are being made. And I'm just wondering, at what point do you guys think it's okay to screw the government and do what you want?
Awesome.
What a lead.
This is
what a lead in.
This could be fun.
Okay.
No, let's start with why you thought it was such a shambles.
Okay.
Because you're normally quite generous with this stuff.
I am.
Like, you give a lot of leeway to.
I do,
government.
because it is a hard job, and I don't normally think that it all comes down to one person. So I find it a bit hard to give an individual flack, because even Boris Johnson didn't write that. Let's be honest, that was something that was done by a team of people that all agreed. Blah 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 blah. So I don't think it's fair just to throw your disgrace at one individual. But that doesn't mean they're not responsible in part. How's that?
Are you waiting for me to jump in to have a go at you?
No.
No, okay, all right.
No. Yeah, so that's why I'm trying to be a bit generous.
All right, but go on, specifics. I want to hear this.
Well, no, I think so far we've had some really clear messages, right? And it's been quite... Yeah, relatively. As in, stay at home is a bit hard to misread, isn't it?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
Even though it's delayed. It was delayed, but
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I'm not saying they've done great.
Clear message.
Yeah, I'm not saying they've done great. I'm saying up to now, in the last however many weeks, it's been relatively easy to understand for people. Just stay at your house. You know, that's not that difficult. And as a marketing strategy, that's pretty effective when you've got to be just clear and simple. And all of a sudden, they've moved on to this idea of stay alert, which could mean anything to anyone, really. And I know today they've sent out that 50-page document that kind of tries to clarify it. But let's be honest, people are not going to read that. The average person. Steve, I know you have. I've had a little look, but not properly. But my point is, the average person on the street is not likely to read that. They tuned into that address to be told what they needed to do, and it was vague. So there's lots of things like that I just think was a bad move, and it's complicated things. Today I've seen pictures of people rammed on the tube, like with a day's notice. Like last night, you've got to go to work tomorrow, everyone, and people are, you know, and it was actually not meant. Even that was wrong. It was actually Wednesday.
Even that was wrong.
Yeah. So, yeah, I thought it was a shambles. I don't think it's going to make... I think it's going to be a disaster, actually, if I'm honest. I think you could...
Wow.
I reckon we're going to see quite a spike in a couple of weeks' time of infections and things. Because as soon as there's any leeway, people will start taking it into their own hands and kind of figure out for themselves, and that's when terrible things happen. So, did I just freeze?
You broke up quite badly there.
Sorry.
Boom. Sorry. It is your internet.
Yeah, and it must be mine tonight.
I win. It's you.
Yeah, I was saying if you give people any leeway, then they're going to start interpreting some of that for themselves, and it's just going to be a bit of a free-for-all and a bit of a disaster.
But that's interesting because you've just said about giving people leeway, but then you're asking this question where we say, now screw that. So that's a matter of interpretation. It's just a case of which side of the line do you...
No, because so that's not
what
my...
do you mean?
That's not my issue about disagreeing with the government. It's not their marketing strategy. I think marketing strategy in their campaign is just not very helpful, and it's going to be a disaster. But there's some specifics within it that I was just thinking about hypothetically. The idea of schools going back, for example, in June, which is only 3 weeks away. I was thinking to myself, if it was asked of us to send our children back in, I can tell you now, I'm not doing it.
For what reason wouldn't you do it?
Because I think if there's any risk whatsoever, I'm not putting them in school. Quite simply.
Okay, what if they came and said every teacher and every child who come in this school will be tested before they're given admission at the beginning of term?
Yeah.
The class numbers will be limited, and there will be appropriate risk assessments made for social distancing as much as you can with that age group.
Because there's idiots.
No, I didn't say that. What if they said we can do this? Is what we'll be doing.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is that even if you have these things in place theoretically, I mean, theoretically in shops people are meant to be keeping 2 meters away from me. I went there the other day and got like lent on by some old woman.
And normally you'd really enjoy that.
And so like no matter what you put in place, there will still be people that will screw it up. That's one thing.
So
yeah.
Okay.
I'm
September comes.
I'm surprised you're on this side of the line, Steve, but carry on.
I think he's playing devil's advocate.
Just asking questions.
Yeah.
You go to... They delay it till September.
Yeah.
Now they've got a vaccine.
Yeah.
But the spread's still there.
Yeah.
And they still need to take precautions, but they're now starting to say it would be good for children to go back to school. September?
Well, I know where you're getting at. It's gonna be whenever it happens, it's gonna be a very difficult thing for people, and there will always be an element of risk. I appreciate that. The question is, you've got to surely do the whole school thing when the risk is at the lowest it could possibly be, and it right now feels like there's still quite significant risk with no vaccine. And like I said, there are idiots who will screw the rules up anyway. And then the other thing is like more of a psychological thing. I'm not entirely sure it's going to be that healthy mentally for kids to go into a school. Can you imagine turning up to the school gates with a 4-year-old, right? And you go up to the gate and there's a parent, a teacher in like full PPE. Right, you've got to go in, and this child has got to go through this whole rigmarole of washing their hands, keeping distant from people, possibly wearing masks. I don't think that's a great idea.
I mean, my only comeback to that is that they haven't even been able to get PPE for care homes or hospitals. Do you really think they're going to get PPE equipment for PPE because it's PPE? The E is the equipment, so I don't have to say PPE equipment. Are they going to get PPE for schools? I mean, come on.
Yeah. No, probably not. But I mean,
I think I get your point is right.
Here you are, kids. Scrawl on this. I've got crayon on my face shield.
yeah. So,
Miss, can I have some new gloves? Johnny, cut them.
Yeah.
So
I just kind of think, actually, for my kids who are young, who will be going into back into reception for a month, if that, and then my little one going into their nursery, it's not worth it. It feels like a very unnecessary risk. So it's the risk element of it. It seems severe, and it's also unnecessary. Like, they don't need to be in, really, in terms of their education. There's nothing in reception class that's going to be that important, is it? Sorry, any teachers that are listening. Yeah, I know it's very complicated, and that was a blasé thing for me to say. I'm not going to let them go in, but that is how I feel at the moment.
Okay.
So
next question. Sorry, Dan. Next question.
You go for it. I love it.
Along with all the information that's been produced, is that failure to comply with many of these regulations will be stricter fines than have previously been given.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that goes to this whole situation of getting them into schools, but I guess the question would be, would you feel okay with getting into legal trouble with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, you would.
I think I
You
would.
be
I would.
happy.
I would be okay. Yeah. I mean, one, I think I'm not going to be the only parent. So them trying to manage legal action against potentially millions of parents is going to be an interesting thing for them to try to do.
Yeah.
Anyway, this wasn't meant to be a conversation about me. Like, this was a lead in to to the wider picture.
Yeah, but you've already set the whole thing up by saying you would sack off the government advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dan, what would you do?
What would I do?
Yeah.
I mean, we're in a really interesting position because, so just a bit of backstory. Our son is 7. He was born very early, significant lung issues, so has there's a high level of risk with an underlying health situation that does put him into a category. That said, when you look at the stats worldwide, mercifully, children seem to be being spared on quite a significant... Like, the stats just don't bear out that this is impacting children.
On the whole.
But when you say on the whole, that's one death, isn't it? Then means not on the whole. So, of course. But when you look at the figures of how many have died worldwide... You know, and that's why I'm asking you about the end point and what's an acceptable level of risk, because actually Max and Poppy could go into school, Noah could go into school and contract some other health condition that isn't being, it hasn't reached this kind of pandemic level and face similar challenges. So I'm just trying to find where our levels sit with this and what's a reasonable level of risk for us. We've decided that we will keep Noah out of school for as long as we possibly can because of that level of risk that he faces as an individual. But I think for parents as a whole, I think it's a really difficult one to navigate because there are so many variables at play. Like, you can't, it's not just sending your kids to school, it's the socioeconomic issues that circle around the need for childcare, it's siblings, it's accommodation, it's food. I mean, there's just so much stuff here that I don't think are universal. I mean, my own beef with the government's approach to this is that it's been so absolutising. Like, there hasn't been sufficient nuance. And I mean, as a public speaker, you know the burden of not being able to say everything you need to say in one sitting, right? Like, it's unreasonable to expect a prime minister to sit there and in a 10-minute address speak to every individual situation in the nation. Like, that's not fair. I actually think he did a very good job on Monday night.
Hang on.
And I'll tell you why.
Hang on, before we get to that, in a sec. Just want to... You said about Noah. Hypothetically, if they said 1st of June, we want all primary school children back in school, what are you going to do?
We wouldn't put him in.
Right.
Only because we want a period of bedding down. We want to see how it plays out.
It's very unlikely they would do that as well.
No, it is unlikely because there's so many things that...
Of course.
But for us, we're viewing it very much on his individual. Like, we wouldn't want to make a blanket. No one should send their kids back to school.
Oh, I'm not saying that either. Like, parents can do what they want.
Just, I mean, and this is the complexity of the issue, isn't it? It's like so many things at play here. Because what do you do about teachers' salaries and school premises? Like, it's not a single line of analysis here, is it? It's like a multivariated, variegated. I can never say it properly. There are so many things. So, yeah, just to finish my thing on the government things. So, excuse me. I think what he said wasn't too bad. I think as far as his actual address, the issue I had was the publications. Because what they effectively did was publish their internal strategy to the public. So the shift from stay at home, protect the NHS, what was the last bit of the original one? Save lives. That is still legit. Like, that is still the functioning strategy that should be at play for the public at large. The government might internally be starting to process, okay, we need to be alert to this, we need to think through the issues, we need to control the spread of the virus, etc. What they did is they spent money. Well, this is what it seems like. They spent money on the branding and were like, shit, we need to actually use this because we've spent the money on the posters and we'll publicise this. Well, actually, that's it seems to me to be a legitimate staged or phased process that they internally need to be processing. But you don't say that to a public with 1 day's notice, to just drop that level of shift. That's just a marketing communication. No, there was no lead in. It was just, you've been looking at this poster for the last 8 weeks. We're now going to scrap that and give you this one with a 20-minute, well, not even that, 10-minute talk to explain it. That's not how you run things. Like, every communications manager knows that's not how you do it.
Yeah.
It's just not how branding works, I'm afraid. So I think they ballsed up on that, frankly. But the actual content of his address, I think he was trying to introduce a level of nuance, because let's be straight up with this, the economy is not just a financial issue. It's livelihoods and people's health. So there's a dynamic interplay, isn't there, between prioritising the nation's health but recognising the economic implications. Like, if you don't restore a standard of living to people, if you don't look after the economy, the long-term damage of it is going to be far worse than just what the virus does. So they're constantly negotiating that. I think what I'm disappointed in is how quickly overnight they went from health being the priority to the economy being the priority, and there's been no gradual rebalance.
And it also seems a bit strange to me that not strange, almost predictable, that the people that he's saying are the ones that, if you can't work from home, you need to go in, are typically the lowest paid construction, all those type of people. So there's going to be a lot of poorer people getting sick.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's already being borne out, right? So you see that in that they released a study, the ONS were dealing with the stats around who is most susceptible, and that's already becoming clear.
Yeah.
That certain professions that sit around that category seem to be experiencing more challenges.
Okay, so obviously we are thinking in particular about, the example that I gave was about children, but obviously there's potentially lots of other advice that the government are going to ask you to do, i.e. go back to work. A lot of people are very unhappy about that. It seems like some people may be in a position where they're asked or forced to go into work, otherwise they'll lose their jobs, all that kind of thing. So, as Christians...
As what?
Chrisos. Does that come into play when we talk about respecting our government rules? Would you say? Would that impact your thinking in any way? Steve's nodding. Go on, Steve.
Sorry, I forgot it's a podcast.
Yeah, you have to speak.
It does, because I think the scriptures teach that we're to be subject to governing authorities, believing that these authorities are from God. And I think the particularly striking thing when I read that in Romans 13, verse 1, is that Paul is in a society where your ruling government is not the most godly government or authority that you could be subject to. And I also find that challenging personally, because I do a lot of thinking, and I don't think I've come to an answer of how that plays into a government that is democratic by nature, where we do have a voting voice and rights to challenge governmental authorities within the law. And we have such thing as civil disobedience, which you're quite entitled to do to an extent. I don't know exactly how that works, but so I think that's my baseline guiding principle. With those two, one thing that strikes me, which keeps me to that principle, if I'm honest, and another that is a challenge to me, because you know me, I'm not particularly
pro-government.
People find that quite shocking about me. I'm not a monarchist. B, I'm very critical of government. And C, I spend a lot of time observing politics and reading into it. And so I have that constant struggle of I don't normally talk about things publicly like this, knowing this is actually going to be listened to by 2 people or whatever. But even then, I don't tend to voice things. I usually do it on a one-to-one basis. But that's my guiding principle, and that's often why I'm quiet and not very public about my opinions.
Yeah,
don't know if that answers anything.
Yeah, it's helpful. I can see Dan has grabbed the book. Are we going to have a battle of the Bible verses here?
Well, I know that the general recourse is to Romans 13, and there's one of my favourite theologians, ethicist in the States, something of a thorn in the side of the American administration, Stanley Hauerwas, if you've come across Hauerwas. In fact, there's a brilliant excerpt from a conference where this discussion around Romans 13 as a basis for civil obedience is kind of the centrepiece of the conference. And I think, if my memory serves me correct, it was around the time the Bush administration decided to take action, military action, in the Middle East and the Iraq War. And the thing that always sticks in my mind with Hauerwas's comments is that he says the temptation is for Christians, just by default, purely because of the way the text is presented, is that we tend to separate out Romans 13 from Romans 12.
Yeah.
The temptation to separate out 12 and 13 is what Hauerwas highlights, because the character of your Christian faith is what he talks through in 9 through 21. And the idea of blessing those who persecute you, not cursing them, and leaving room for the wrath of God, which I think is a little bit of a misunderstood passage, because the character of that wrath or return of God is, I think, encapsulated in verse 20, if your enemies are thirsty. I just love the way Paul's mind works. It's like, beloved brothers, sisters, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. And then he says, no, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them a drink, for by doing this you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not overcome evil by evil, but overcome it with good. And I think that sets the context for our interaction within society, is that if you are called to evil action, you're not supposed as a Christian to engage with that.
Yeah.
That's that's the defining. It's like where I see, because then he then goes into this whole section around, okay, given that that's the case, given that your love should be genuine, that you should hate evil and hold fast to what is good, verse 9, and that you're loving one another with mutual affection, that actually, if that's the character of your civic engagement, then when government comes along and asks you to act contrary to that, that's the moment for civil disobedience. Because your authority to your formation is being shaped by a higher authority. Because I think, Paul, and this is Hauerwas's point, is that actually this call for character applies also to Caesar. Like the call for transformation to Christ-like character applies to all people everywhere. That's the good news of the kingdom, and therefore applies to Caesar. So that I think we mustn't, and that's what Hauerwas would say, is never read Romans 13 without reading Romans 12.
I like that. That's really helpful.
The video's on YouTube. It's brilliant. I mean,
sorry, can I take his name again?
Yeah, Stanley Hauerwas. I mean, he is pretty ruthless in a debate. I mean, he really does take a strip off the guy, which is funny given the thing he's talking about, but it's still worth a watch.
Yeah.
Well, the question then I think that naturally comes out of that is, if we go just with this, let's just go with this part of scripture now and come to other bits that are applicable in a moment, is therefore obeying government in this instance doing something evil?
There's a level of interpretation there, isn't there? At that point, it's like the individual's got to make that decision as to is what the government is suggesting evil or not. So it hasn't really solved anything, has it?
Well, no, it has given you a principle to work with and to begin working with. So let's work with it. I think we should solve this for you.
Okay.
By the end of the podcast, I think we should.
Great. Okay. I mean, the immediate thing that's coming to my mind is in Acts. I can't tell you where, but when is it Peter says about great, Jamie, well done. Whether it's something about whether it's right in the sight of God or go on, you fill that in.
No, you keep talking and I'll fill you in because I've got to find it first.
Okay. When
Acts
Peter
5:29.
Yeah. Okay. When they're at trial, they basically say, we're going to basically put God above you. That's my paraphrase. So there seems to be instances like that too.
Acts 5 is the apostles have been questioned by the high priest and Sanhedrin, and they've been ordered not to preach Jesus anymore. And he says in verse 29, we must obey God rather than men.
Yeah, that's the one.
I mean, this is a massively live issue, like it's happening now. So I don't know whether you picked up on the Church Times' report. There was an article written by Reverend Tilby, I think, and she's received quite a serious amount of criticism because she accused the church of moral cowardice in not opening churches during lockdown.
Yeah.
And she said, look, we've always been sanctuaries and places and spaces where actually, those that are sick or in need, I think, reading between the lines, I feel that she's probably got a little bit of an issue with some of the creative approaches to worship. I think her own tradition is much more conservative and traditional Anglican. And so I think the more creative, free-thinking demonstrations of at-home worship have possibly riled her a little. But I think this is something like, what if a minister or a church has the conviction that they should be open during this time? So it's a genuinely, if you want to use the phrase preaching Jesus to apply it to acts. I mean,
Yeah, I think there's a difference with the whole church debate, in that the government hasn't closed down churches in order to stop the message being preached. They've closed down churches due to public health. And historically churches have done that before. Obviously there are issues that you have to work through. And I think that the reason I bring that up is because that does play into this question of, is government asking us to do something evil in these things by putting these restrictions in place? I think my initial answer for the lockdown is no. They've done something right for public health, and which is what they're there for, to bring stability to a nation. But now it gets complicated because they're seeking to bring us out of that lockdown. Quite frankly, when people are still nervous and still apprehensive, and the threat hasn't disappeared, and they continue to talk about a second wave. And so now the question becomes, well, as they lift these restrictions, are they doing what's right or wrong? And I think there's a whole new dynamic at play that an individual has to think about, because it's very easy for when government says everything stops, you got to stop.
Yeah.
But now they're saying, as they begin to say, okay, not everything, or everything's beginning to gradually open again, and it's all conditional, then that becomes more complicated, especially in a country that is democratic. I've got a lady in my church who, her family live in an undemocratic country, and that undemocratic country has handled lockdown a lot better because, they can. Because a government says stop and it stops. Government says start and it starts. And it's all much easier. Whereas our mindset is not, government are telling us to do something, we better do it. Government are now telling us to do something, and we've complied with the bit that says stay at home. And now it's like, and now you're telling us to come out. And I think Dan's right. In the weeks that we've been in lockdown, every day, more than once a day, you've had in your home, in your ears, in your eyes, stay at home.
Yeah.
And now on Sunday morning, you wake up to stay alert.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, this is going to be difficult for people to get their heads around.
Yeah. You've kind of said about going against the government's wishes if there's something evil. I guess the question is, does that mean intention or does that mean result? Because I'm not really sure that what they're doing is evil in intention, but the result could be like really catastrophic, which may be an unintentional consequence.
I suppose you could. Yeah, that's a good question. Like, your ability to perceive someone's intentions is very challenging.
Because I don't think the government are not saying. I don't think it's coming from an evil place of like, we want to send all these kids back so that we can get. Well, actually, now I say it out loud, I think there's probably an element of, I want to send these kids back to school so we can get their parents back into the workforce so we can build the economy because we want money.
And that is part of their job. That's not necessarily evil either.
No.
Because that is their role in order to keep a stability within the nation.
Yeah.
And so in one sense, yes, we could go, we could try and do a bit of moral posturing again and go, if they're thinking about money, it's terrible and evil, and we shouldn't really be thinking about money. But money is reality. In the way our society is structured, we unless you're going to fundamentally change everything about what we know in our society, then they have to think about money and how you get the economy back.
But that is a good question, though, because if you're thinking about it in those terms, then the question, where my mind goes is there a responsibility for those that are subject to a higher authority? So to use the language of citizenship, yes, I am a British citizen, but as a follower of Jesus, my primary identity is one that is wishing to see an increase of the kingdom of God. And in monetary terms, Jesus has quite a lot to say about how we treat money. Like, you could easily, and many have, trying to think about, is it Howard Yoda? Not Yoda as in Star Wars, but John Howard Yoda.
I was thinking Little Green Man.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. He wrote a book called The Politics of Jesus, and even the title suggested for the fact that there is a strong case to be made for an alternative way of ordering society, family, relationships, money, healthcare, all of that stuff that sits within the idea of what would happen if God's rule and reign came on the earth, like the kingdom of God here and now.
Yeah.
Then maybe there is a challenge then for Christian communities to say, well, maybe we shouldn't prioritise money the way a capitalist free market society does. And actually, yes, it may be legitimate with their frame of reference for them to do things that way, but it's actually our responsibility to live life in an alternative mode. And this is a good way to prove it. So, very practically, as I take the responsibility in an individual sense to say, maybe I shouldn't be so concerned about purchasing goods for myself in the way I used to, but actually to be more community focused and thinking, do you know what, I'll ring my neighbours up. What do they need this week? What can I purchase for them? As a way of, at an individual level, breaking some of the capitalistic, I've got to kind of accumulate and grab and hold and all of that stuff that is pumped out by a nation state that says, no, this is the only way to structure society. That's a lot there. But I just wonder whether there's something about this situation that affords us an opportunity to do something of a rethink. And these are all questions that are out in the public domain. I mean, the genie is out of the bottle on things like a universal income. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Like my mate Cameron, who hopefully we'll have on here one day, he said this is an experiment we've been talking about for years.
Yeah.
And now we've effectively done it. And what we've done is we've created this. I mean, money is the illusion that we all agree on. It's not Dominic Raab. Rishi Sunak stood up in the first thing and basically said to everyone, "Can we all agree that I add an extra set of zeros to the computer screen?" And everyone went, "Yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. Let's do that." And no one batted an eyelid, because we all know it's a game we all play. It's just as long as everyone agrees on the terms and conditions and everyone's compliant with that we all get on in some form or another. The unfortunate thing is that tends to serve a certain subset of society very well. And I think Jesus comes to challenge that with a different ethic. So I wonder whether that's up for grabs in this whole conversation about how we relate as Christians to the state and to authority.
I mean, I've got no like theological insight into this, what I'm about to say, but it just feels wrong that we're in a position where the most underpaid workers are being made effectively to go into work, to send their kids potentially into schools so that they can survive financially. Like, that's just can't be right.
I get to play devil's advocate a little bit and say that was this something that I'm saying you because you said it.
Bugger.
That
yeah.
Was this a feeling you had 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, when your bin men came round? I mean, sorry, that's unfair. It's unfair of me to do that.
No, it's not. It's no,
because
I didn't.
I find it interesting because I do think we these things become a concern when it suddenly is facing us and affecting us, and actually, like Boris saying, in one thing I did take exception to was Boris saying in his 10-minute recorded message that lacked clarity, that people can go back to work now, like construction and et cetera, et cetera. Some of the people he mentioned are actually still at work.
Yeah,
they're not returning to work. Yeah. They're continuing to work, and inexcusably he said the same again this afternoon, and then he even dared to try and correct Keir Starmer in the House of Commons, saying that of course you do realise some construction has continued. It's like, well, you're the one who said it hasn't, so like you're the one who's saying it's all returning. So and I know some of it has stopped, but I kind of go, actually, from day one, this lockdown has needed essential workers to continue going. And the question I want to ask actually is, why? It's not a question. The point I want to make is that I think it's not an injustice that these people are having to return to essential work. I think it's an injustice that these essential workers are underpaid.
I'm going to second that, because I think that's the justice issue. I think really when it comes down to it, it's not the issue of work, it's the perceived value of that work, right? Like that. Why is it the case that there is a grading? I mean, it's not without irony, and I'm not the first person to say this. I feel like I'm parroting stuff that's been said. And what do I know? These are really complex issues, aren't they? I think it's easy to sit here and come up with, postulate grand theories of how to restructure markets from my study. I don't understand it all, but these are observations from my experience. Is that it seems to me strange that 5-6 weeks, no, longer than that, where are we? We're in week 8, aren't we? Let's say 3 months ago, was it, the Home Secretary referred to the main body of now key workers as unskilled.
Really? I did miss that. How did I miss that?
Oh, yeah. So that was it was a travesty. It was like a national outrage that she'd used that language, because she'd said that anyone, and there was a lot, it did make me laugh. It's a lot of clergy kicked up a fuss about this. So I was like, come on, guys, seriously. I think she used this, she used a fiscal metric. So she said, if you are under 25k a year, you are a low skilled worker. So I was like, wow, okay. I'm privileged, I'm privileged that I've had an incredible education. I'm in a stable situation, and I'm being referred to as a low skilled worker. And yet, in the context of that privilege, there are people that are working 2-3 jobs, that are fighting to feed their families. I look out my window and I see people coming out of the flats opposite me at ridiculous hours, all hours, to try and survive. And they could be paid by these corporations a living wage, a London living wage. That's well within their power to do so. Why aren't they? That seems like a very fundamental, basic thing that could be fixed. And we've proved that. We've proved that by saying, oh, do you know what? Rough sleeping. What we'll do is we'll house everyone in hotels.
Yeah.
Overnight. Oh, what we'll do is we'll furlough and we'll pay 80% of everyone's salaries overnight. So it's like, well, we've got the money.
They found a magic money field.
Yeah, they did. They really did.
An orchard.
So
Go on, Steve.
So
you were gonna say
I
something.
don't. Yeah, sorry. Go on.
Sorry, no, I was just going to circle back a bit as well, because I think it's important to actually make the point that we very quickly also go to the risk our government are putting us in for sending us back too early, and these workers, etc. At the same time, we could flip the coin over and say, how many of the cabinet members have actually gone down with coronavirus because they've continued working throughout this lockdown period, and so they're not asking us necessarily. And I'm sort of, this is really hard for me to defend a Conservative cabinet, but it's kind of
it's all coming out now, Steve, isn't it? Yeah. We're going to see your party membership card in a minute.
So I do think that is important to remember. There's so many things I want to say, which I'm in danger of not making any coherent sense, and this podcast just being Steve sounding off every now and again about things that he's just thought of.
I was going to ask you, Steve, about the whole dynamic being a pastor and having political views. You've already referenced the fact that you keep it fairly under wraps. Have you ever encountered some challenge? So one of the big things that we're involved in as a church is that we are quite heavy into community organising. So one of our partner members is a community organisation called Citizens UK, which is an affiliation, an association of different institutions that basically work together to try and generate enough power to hold government to account. And we quite actively campaign as a church for justice issues. And there have been moments where the political bent has caused some interesting conversation. I'd just be interested to hear how that's played out for you, seeing as you've got quite strong views on certain parties by the sounds of it.
I will say I don't have necessarily views on certain parties. I and I can prove that I voted Conservative twice, and I voted different parties at different times. I vote according to policy and what I believe is right. At the same time, what I think is right is I have very strong views about. I think there's been probably a handful of times, not even that, where things have been where I've kind of gone, perhaps should have backed off a bit there. One was very, very simple. I and not very much of nothing really. I made a comment about how I'm not a monarchist in a sermon, and it just really troubled this lady, who's the sweetest lady in the world, and to the point that she mentioned it to me through the week. She never ever criticizes me, and she was like, and so I was like, I'm not telling us to all revolt against them. Just don't like them.
What did you call them? Like non-elected sponges?
No, I just no.
I'd have loved to have heard that sermon.
No, I just said I'm not the greatest fan of monarchy, but I want to tell you this story about the royal family. And so it was.
I had my gun by the fence.
It was just nothing, because this lady really loves the royal family. That was it. And she was just like, couldn't conceive that a Christian wouldn't be respectful about the royal family. And she's got there's lots of reasons she got the wrong end of the stick and was a bit more offended than another person would have been.
Right.
But
it was Princess Anne.
The only other one was when I was emailing the local MP, because I emailed it from my church address, and I didn't hold back in what I said. I started very polite, and the response came back with the party typical pre-written email that they were supposed to send back on this particular subject. And so I wrote back, and my email was incredibly sarcastic in tone and incredibly punchy. And this guy's a Christian, who's an MP, and I seem to remember putting something in there that kind of just was a sort of call yourself a Christian moment.
Ouch.
It wasn't that, but the motive in my heart was that. And he responded saying kind of, "Oh, I notice you're a pastor of a local church." And I was like, "Oh, yeah,
Crap.
Whoops. Should have been a bit more gracious in this correspondence." And I apologise for my tone, but told him
But there were no expletives. Like you didn't.
No.
Not from a church account.
Not from any account. I just wouldn't do that.
That's not true.
But I just kind of did the. I said, I apologise for my tone. My points still stand, and I'd like some answers on this one.
Okay.
And he was all right.
That's interesting. I just find it fascinating how politics and faith interact within church life. I mean, we weren't particularly politically engaged as kids. Like, we're not as kids. I mean, what kids are, but it wasn't something that was really discussed, was it, with us, Jim? Like, it's been something that's emerged later on. Well, and I do find it interesting.
Well, this might take us full circle, because at the beginning you were talking about like this disconnect between the church and the way that church was done and the real world. And of course that's going to happen if people aren't willing to engage in the real needs that people are experiencing, whether that be social needs or welfare or politics. Like, that's the real stuff. So that's going to happen, that disconnect in church, if you don't go there. And that was definitely, some of the traditions that we were involved in growing up was like, if you did, it was deemed you were just preaching some sort of social gospel, and that was meant in a negative way.
Which is a weird phrase, isn't it? Because it's like, what gospel isn't social?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, I think partly because contextually the rural communities tend towards a more conservative bent, shall we say?
Oh yeah, I mean, flipping Brexit was all over the church.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to avoid the Brexit conversation. But
we've been quiet about this for flipping however many years, and then Brexit comes up, and all of a sudden, we're like, we're all politicians.
Yeah. I was working for the open air mission. Yeah, I was working for the open air mission at the time.
Oh, well, hey, there we go. That's a name drop, isn't it?
And it's all right. The problem wasn't with them.
Okay.
Which meant I was up in different areas of the country during Brexit. And yeah, for very often, I think I've kind of been politics. Not that you don't mix, but I think probably I've been a lot more reserved about just giving a public view all the time, just because of the frictions it could cause. And so on the Brexit thing, I was trying my hardest to kind of not bring that into my preaching and all of that sort of thing when I was on these mission stuff. And then we were in this prayer meeting with a number of churches, and this guy just stands up and just starts praying for Brexit. And I wasn't a Brexiteer, I was a Remainer, and still am. And I was just like seething in my seat. And like, I was just like, okay, so we don't do politics until kind of we feel really strongly about our conservative position.
Yeah. Did you stand up and do a counter prayer?
You've
got to balance it out, otherwise it's like 1-0 to them.
Yeah.
I didn't. There's one of the guys had stood up who was in charge of the meeting, to his credit, and said that's a really divisive issue, and that's not what we're here to pray about. So don't do that, please. So
would it have been okay to say we don't want Brexit?
In that meeting,
yeah,
would it have been okay?
Yeah, from your perspective.
My perspective was, I think we're in a democracy, and I always encourage people to look at the policies, to ask themselves whether they think this is in line with their beliefs about God. And no policy is ever going to be perfect, but particularly your local representative, what are they talking about, and what are they talking about, what's important for them in their community, and then vote based on your conscience. I don't think it's my job to tell someone what they should vote for. I'm starting to get to the point of I think there is space for a minister to, and I think this is controversial. This is certainly a live issue in my circles at the moment. I think there is space. A lot of guys in conservative evangelicalism in the UK probably would be hesitant to say it's the pastor's place to say anything politically. I think I disagree with that. I think I'm more and more disagreeing with that. I don't think I'm going to run to be a politician, but I do think the prophetic voice ought to speak about things that are clearly just not right. I don't know.
I mean, how on the earth would
I'm working this through.
How would you be able to divide? And I think what the church has attempted to do for so long is to try to divide the spiritual stuff from the real world stuff. Like, there's no way you could get away with saying that Jesus wasn't political, wasn't about the social.
Oh no, yeah, you can.
Well,
we've done it for a very, very long time, and we've become very good at it.
Well, I'm not saying that it's not tried.
I got seriously rebuked recently by a senior family member, and I'm not even bothered if people are listening into this, because they basically said my job as a pastor is to purely care for the salvation of someone's soul. And I was like, well, A, that's God's responsibility. B, you probably need to investigate what the Greek word for salvation means, because it actually has a much more social. Like, if you spoke to a first century Jew about what you were talking about salvation, it would be very unlikely, given the mix of ideas that were going on around at the time, that they would have even remotely articulated anything about immortality. The whole thing was the beef around what's going on politically. How do we live at peace as a nation, like the land?
Yeah,
like that was the deal. So when Jesus comes in and starts talking about how you live ethically with one another, like pleading, given the context of the failed revolt that happened not too long ago and everyone got killed, and seeing on the horizon, guys, if you take up arms, this is going to go south. Oh, and hey presto, 70 AD, yes it does. Everyone gets clean, everyone gets dealt with pretty severely. Jesus sees that on the horizon and he weeps. He weeps for Jerusalem. He's like, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I long to gather you into the house. But you didn't listen to the prophets who told you how to live peaceably.
Yeah.
You killed them, and you're going to do it to me as well. So the whole thing is grounded in a way of life in the here and now.
That's what
I think what we've done is we've just pushed all of his words into eternity. That means that we don't have to deal with the here and now, and we've created this distinction between politics as a realm of the secular and religion as a realm of the spiritual. And I just think it's completely are completely erroneous.
Well, I think he would have laughed at you back then if you'd even attempted to do the same thing. Like there's no separation especially for the Jewish people between faith and politics. Like there's not really a difference. It was so interlinked. And you're right, I kind of see the same thing with Jesus' message. I mean, I would go as far to say that I think primarily what he's doing is he's doing something political and social, which have ramifications longer term when you talk about spiritual stuff at that point. But I think his main thing was about changing the world here and now. So I don't think you can start separating the two, saying this is spiritual stuff, this is, Jesus was all about this, which is very separate from politics. Yeah.
Well, we touched this last week, didn't we? Talk about, the proclamation Jesus is Lord was a flagrant...
Two fingers up to the Roman Empire.
Two fingers up to the Roman Empire. It's like the claim that there was another authority, and all the language of kingdom and the Basileia to Theo, the kingdom of God, was flied in the face of the Pax Romana, the offer of peace that came from violence of the military might of an empire that could just do bloody well what they liked. And Jesus says, well, actually, if you're going to pursue that course, you're not going to experience peace, because violence doesn't beget peace. It's just going to sustain a pattern of, but yet churches, for some strange reason, I don't know. I haven't really gotten to the bottom of it, to be honest. I don't understand. Maybe it's because it's too complex, and it's part of the way of compartmentalising the problems in the here and now, that if we just push it all into eternity, we can just sit still, hold on, and ride this thing out.
Well, it's an easy
option
if you can say that I'm happy to sit here in my church and have this internal faith, which is like between me and Jesus. It doesn't really affect how I'm going to interact with people around me. It's not going to affect the politics. It's not going to affect how I treat people that are poor. It's not going to affect the way I do all these things in my community. And that's pretty a nice ride if this idea of let's just hang on until we die and we'll get to heaven, and that's when all the good stuff's going to happen. And that's, of course, a byproduct is this disconnect between politics and faith.
I'm going to push back a little bit, because I think I would say, absolutely, there's political things within the Gospels without a shadow of a doubt. I think at the same time, don't overemphasize that at the detriment of the spiritual, in the terms of that this kingdom is a spiritual kingdom. It is for all ages. And I think when you overemphasize a political, it suddenly just becomes another political movement that is liable, which is fragile. And so, but I would say, not coming from exactly where you guys are coming from, I would have the same convictions about actually all of life is faith, all of life is theological. You can't divide it. And I'm really encouraged to see, particularly studies in the Old Testament from the evangelical point of view, conservative evangelical reform point of view, that those have kind of been helping us think that through much more, because you just can't. You're right. You go to a first century Jew, you wouldn't find the divide. No. I think we've got to take into consideration also that in the UK we have this whole history of the Church of England and the Great Ejection of the Puritans within the Church of England, and a nonconformist movement being very strong. And so whenever we start seeing church and politics coming together, church and state coming together, there is a natural suspicion. And so, and I think plausibly for many of it, because I don't know, there's just, it does seem that they don't mix well to me. At the same time, I know guys who are peers of mine who are from the same theological persuasion as mine, who are working tirelessly in social and political campaigns. Someone who is on the phone supporting women who have had abortions and regret it, and he spends a lot of his time on that support line because he feels strongly about the injustice of abortion. It's just, don't know. And then there's others, you know, who I think of who are engaging with their local MPs who are trying to say, look, as a church, what can we be doing? How can we help? We're limited, but is there any way we can be assisting? So I think I just want to shed a bit of that in there, that I think I'm seeing encouraging signs. I don't think the preacher always needs to be a political analyst, but certainly I think they ought to be concerned a bit more with what's going on in their society, and sometimes a prophetic voice. And I'd be pleased to see all of that old idea of, Daniel, you better just stop worrying about your community and start just keep preaching a gospel that doesn't have anything to say to this world today. I think they've wrongly gone off the tracks, and they've overemphasized the spiritual.
And this is going to come down to some definitions things again about overemphasizing.
Oh, that old chestnut.
Yeah, overemphasizing the spiritual. Because I would imagine that, Dan, your perspective is that there isn't really a difference when you talk about salvation. Like, that is the same thing. Spiritual and political is the same thing. Whereas Steve, I'd say you would say the opposite of that. There's a link there, but it's not wrapped up.
I don't know if I would. I'm just saying from just how people perceive it. I think you got these false opposites. I think where you've got the social gospel and then the gospel.
yeah, of course.
And I'm like, well, no, the gospel is wrapped up in the social. It talks about transformation of the individual, and that therefore transformation of the world around you. We're heading towards a new creation. The new creation has already begun. I think,
but I guess what I mean is that your primary goal, I'm putting words in your mouth, so correct me, but your primary goal in terms of the gospel and salvation is ultimately to save individual souls from eternity in hell, I guess, is where you'd go with that. Is that fair to say? The penultimate aim. Whereas I imagine, Dan, that's
the ultimate.
Yeah, sorry, the ultimate aim.
Right.
Well, depends what stance you're on. Penultimate or ultimate. That's another story. Whereas Dan,
I thought this was going to be another story. I thought this was another podcast. But if we're going to touch it, I'll summarise.
We can touch it quickly. I'm not wanting to go there directly.
Fine.
But I'm just saying that I think we are still talking about different things slightly when we're talking about.
I mean, for me, yes, the ultimate. The ultimate is believing in the Lord Jesus Christ, in order to be a member of His kingdom, both now and for eternity. And yes, that factors in it salvation from hell. And the thing is, I say it deliberately because I get a bit annoyed with evangelical pastors who put it in the positive but never actually, just tried not to say the word hell because they're a bit embarrassed that they believe in it. And I do believe there is salvation from hell, but I wouldn't say. I would say my ultimate is always in the positive for them to believe on the Lord Jesus Christ because He's worth it and because He is transformative and that is a transformation that begins with faith in him, and it's also cosmic, and it's a transformation that does affect the now, not just the then.
Yeah.
But the then is always in view.
Yeah. And just the reason why I bring it up is because it's just an important definition thing.
No, that's great. That's helpful.
Because I think that, obviously that's going to affect where you put your attention in terms of what you do as a church, isn't it?
It is.
So,
I'll touch it then. Hell's real, and I think people are experiencing it now. And I think hell is an existential reality that is something that people experience in differing and varying measures. And I think the good news of the gospel is that there is freedom from such an experience. I'm still working through the full implications of that claim, but I've met people who in their journey through life have experienced something of that, and I can't explain it any other way.
Okay.
Salvation for them then is a freedom from that experience by whatever means the Lordship of Christ impacts their experience. And I think that can't be articulated in a silver bullet kind of way, because it's so incredibly personal. But we'll go into detail on that. But I do think there is eternal implications to that. But I am convinced that Jesus arrived into his very particular historical context with a message that was relevant for the people he was speaking to. And if that's not the case, then it's not very clear.
Nice. Very good. Okie dokie. So basically, we're saying politics are important, guys.
Good. Yeah.
Do you know, in terms of do you send the kids to school?
Yeah.
I'm going to do what I wouldn't ever do to a church member and just throw my hat in and give what I actually think.
Okay.
Do it.
I think that you need to listen to your conscience, particularly as a father caring for their children. And I think you then, with your conscience, need to do whatever it is, but try to do it lawfully. And so you do have the right, thankfully, as a citizen of the UK, to exercise homeschool. And I don't know the ins and outs of that, but I'd say look into it. If you need to, I don't think you would need to. So I'd say go with your conscience and don't violate it.
Good.
Okay, so they say don't talk about politics or religion, and tonight we've done it both. So screw you all. We do our own thing on this podcast. Like it or unsubscribe.
We just lost our other 400 listeners.
I love that you both have gone in with that massively high number. It's like,
well, according to both of you, all these stats are not true. So I'm going to go the opposite way and say there's like 500 people listening. You've got that thing about your YouTube videos. I'm going to do the same with the podcast.
I really hope they aren't true. Because if they are, I might as well resign.
Yeah. Well, that might be the best thing for everybody. And on that note... Oh man. Okay, so the intention for today was to try and keep it relatively light, and we've gone in on politics, religion and politics, salvation. Steve's going on about hell. I mean,
love it.
For heck.
No, sorry, I shouldn't have said.
entirely the wrong point to interject with a love it.
I mean, I love that we're able to talk about these things. It's great.
Oh man.
Yeah,
Roll that in the intro,
I'm enjoying these
please.
conversations.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying these conversations a lot. So
Great.
Okay, guys, blessings upon you and your families.
Thank you very much. See you next week.
see you next week.
It's been an absolute joy.
As always, pleasure.
So thank you everyone for listening to our podcast. Remember to leave a review and subscribe and follow us on social media. And we will see you again next time.